It started really early on. I was always interested, I think, I'm sure as many of you, in creation and ideas and how can they properly be represented, because at the end of the day, this is what curation is about, is how you take ideas, how do you connect concepts, and how do you highlight, what's hidden or that cannot be noticeable. And so my first experiment with curation, I was about 8, and I found I was like hanging out with our family, friends, children at the countryside, and we would collect really weird curiosities at the construction site, something that like was made out of wood, but that looked like something else. And we got together and we created an auction for it. And at the time, parents thought it was cute, but many, many years later, here we are. So, if you have kids, if kids are experimental, help them to develop those traits, because you never know, it could be their future. But really, I'll be honest with you, I never considered myself a curator. My sort of like my studies really were, I studied economics and international relations in university, mostly because I had no idea what I want to study, and this is New York, by the way, the beeps. So I had no idea what I wanted to study. I felt like this is really broad, but what I didn't know is that actually politics and theory of international relations is very similar to what we would study in curation, especially the different theorists. Psychology, psychoanalysis, and art was one of the subjects. And so involuntarily, almost, I fell into the rabbit hole of analyzing not only texts, but also sort of visual narrative stories. And that's where it continued on throughout my thesis. And already then, I don't know if you feel like similar to me, that you've studied something not connected to arts and now this defines you. Definitely not. There's always, like, you can always find a way to find a creative outlet. And I actually think by studying something different, it gives you a competitive advantage where you have a unique point of view on a similar theme. Otherwise, everyone will have the same ideas if they read the same books. So I think, especially in the culture that we're experiencing right now, it's all about experimentation. So I wasn't sure how to tie politics and art, so I decided to write my thesis about the power of photography and sort of drawing ideas of Foucault and power and resistance and tying that into how can we tell strong narrative stories. So I sent a link to like the first part, and then I don't know if someone's going to bother reading 10,000 words, but I do have the full text somewhere. This was like from 10 years ago. And so I've tried sort of like working in different industries, but art was always pulling me in. And I worked in consulting to save up money and go do the Sotheby's Art Master's degree. And I'll tell you this, like Sotheby's, it's a bit exclusive. It's sort of obviously has a certain layer of society that manages to get in there. And the main thing that it teaches you is how to network. We definitely covered like art law and how different businesses operate, but at the end of the day, art business, the traditional art market business, and I'm sure the contemporary one we're seeing right now with NFTs, it's a lot to do with networking and connections. And not coming from the same privileged background as many of my other classmates, I felt like I have to develop those skills, especially because that would highly depend on the job you would get in the future and the opportunities you find. And that's what I pursued. And after working for free at galleries, I just realized I can't work anymore in the traditional art world. It's not opening through the opportunities I want to pursue. It's not agile. There's little room for innovation. I've been invited for a traineeship at Christie's in client strategy, and I was so excited. And I would just like spend the whole day trying to like see how we can improve. It was their 250th anniversary. I was going through the database, identifying ideas of things to do, and I just felt like I wasn't sure if the team wanted to do something exciting or innovative, and it felt like there's this standstill, like you're at the train station. And that was the pivotal moment I realized that actually maybe I need to look elsewhere if I want to continue doing. And that's when I saw an opportunity for .art, the top level domain .art. It's essentially the founder of the company bought the right to operate any .art website name that is out there. And we had to come up with everything, with a pricing model, go-to-market strategy, and figure out how the hell do you educate people in the art world why being online matters. And that was something that was quite a challenge because a lot of people didn't even know what a website is. And so through a series of conversations, we started mapping down that ecosystem. So here I have like a series of interviews with like people like Kickstarter Arts or head of different museums, and they all would tell stories of how they came about to basically be creating and how this being online, having a digital identity ties into that. And so through these conversations, we saw that there's a different art world that's growing. There's an art world that's ready for that shift online, ready for experimentation. And it's completely different to what I've seen before. And so something I came across was an organization called Rhizome. I don't know if you can do a show of hands here or a show of smileys, but has anyone heard before about rhizome.org? Okay, so we have about 4. Oh, no. Okay, we have half. Yes, 100%. I'm so happy to hear that because it's an organization that doesn't get as much credit. It's also part of the interview series that we did. And so something that they do is they basically document the evolution of net art. And another thing they do is 7-on-7. So 7-on-7, it's a conference that early on when I was there, we sponsored, and it was fascinating. It basically brings 7 technologists and 7 artists, something that we see every day on Twitter right now, but back then it was really revolutionary, where different pairs come together and they have 3 months to create something new. And this was sort of like the early stages. I think Bell Labs definitely did that before. And there were some early experiments, but this was like the contemporary version of it, where basically, artists and technologists were like working on something together, and the final projects were very curious and interesting, to say the least. And I think it was definitely the foundation of what we're seeing now with the different projects that are being enabled through the use of blockchain, where creatives come together with developers. So that was sort of like the first venture for me into the world of net art, digital art, meeting Raphael Rosendahl, Alina, Mike Taika, Eddie Wadenknecht, Cindy Gallup. They were all participants in that edition. It was 2017. And from there on, I would realize that the art world has sort of like a very small handful of people who really, truly sort of care and support digital art. So one of the big collectors that also probably doesn't get as much attention is Julia Stochek Foundation. Okay, well, I see some some people recognize. So if you want to explore, they have a very wonderful collection which is documented. In a similar context, there was also data. So David Grin basically used to be the head of video at Art Basel before he opening the website, before he partnered up with the Zabludovic collection. And can you share that name again? Yeah, it's just a link above. So the Julia Stochek Foundation, or is there another name that I should share? Yeah, just let me know. Perfect. Yeah. So then Data Arts was also like one of those few organizations that was bringing artists working with video arts or experimental media from the traditional galleries online and have like a level of representation. So that at the time was also like something big. At the same time, you would have Artsy. So something that Artsy did was quite revolutionary back then. It was basically the first largest platform that would allow art galleries to have a presence online in a very organized way. Something that we probably see now. We have these marketplaces and like super rare spaces. Here you have a platform where galleries pay monthly to be there, and then the team behind Artsy would drive a lot of collector traffic to come and discover art online. But this was all still sort of traditional arts being represented. So I am here, like what I'm doing is I'm basically mapping out the chronology of the last 6 years of what I've encountered moving through. Have you heard of Artsy before? Like, have you guys seen it? Show of emojis. Okay, yes, for sure. Great. I'm asking this because, like in the art world, this was like the biggest thing. But lately, the more and more I ask people that maybe don't come from the art world, it's something completely new. But it's sort of like this predecessor of what we're seeing now with different marketplaces, except it's more for NFTs and art. So Artsy made a very big impact. And then also platforms like Artsnet, which now we know for clickbait journalism, but back then we knew for being one of the biggest and it still is, archives of auction sales. So auctions, they didn't really have their sort of sale history public before 2006, I think. So for collectors to really have any relevant data on analyzing an artist's market, they had to look through all these different databases. And since there was no since there was no blockchain to look at the provenance of transactions, this is what people would use, the price databases. And I think until now, a lot of people, and especially collectors, are still using it. So it's really great to see that shift, but I think we're yet to see for these like old school platforms to make the shift towards blockchain as well. So these were sort of like the biggest players at the time. And then in about 2017, 2018, we would see the rise of Dada, the rise of Snark.art, which now are doing the OG protocol. And these early marketplaces that allowed sort of artists to come on board. And at the same time, just before 2019, we would see the sort of like the needs, especially as COVID hit, for any gallery to have a digital presence. So what we did when I was at .art, we worked with Ars Electronica to do like an online arm for them, because it was the first time that they couldn't host the same format as they did before. So what we did is we did this Ars Electronica. And I think, you know what? I'm still seeing some artists on Twitter right now who I remember were a part of it back then. Is there anyone here that participated in the Ars Electronica open call? And they had, so what we did is we allowed all the artists that entered, there were about 200 of them. All of them were exhibited in a 2D environment for the first year. And then the second year, it was a 3D virtual environment with Fabian Rashid and many others, where we did concrete house.art. I don't know if I can find it. .art, Ars Electronica. And the idea was that basically people from around the world could, at any point of time, come and explore the works. I mean, something that you probably see with OnCyber now. It's the idea of this virtual space has become really popular, but back then it was quite innovative for us. Okay, I need that like grandma meme right now, like, oh, back in the day we used to do this. It was considered cool and innovative and stuff. So yeah, and I think that this is approximately the same time I started. I'm gonna tell you something actually I haven't told people before. So this was a similar time that I started thinking about electric artifacts. Except before it was electric artifacts, it was vendingmachine.art, and we bought the domain. And it was 2019, even before like the COVID started. We bought the domain and we hired an artist designer to create visuals of a vending machine, but it was a futuristic with cat ears vending machine. It had like a robotic arm instead of a mouse floating through the screen for you to pick like a USB stick that was layered as if it's a vending machine for USB sticks. And the idea was that you could collect digital art. So you would click on the different USB and there was an animation of you buying it and it falling down. And we had this concept played out, and everyone I would talk about it, they wanted to be a part of it. They wanted to sort of sponsor us. And you know what happened? Me and the artist, we had a little fallout, and eventually we never made that come true. And it's such a shame. And I think the sort of like, on one hand, I'm really happy because the whole concept was overly complicated. And I think that's what one of the people that came on board told us, that it was more of an art project than a business project, which was fine. But I think something important I learned back then is you have to be really clear from the beginning. Like, is this an art project, and it doesn't hold as much of a long-term commercial value, or are you doing this for profit? And then it's a completely different business model. And I think that what I've experienced later on is that for many people in the space, it continues to be a mix of both, because many of us still have our full-time jobs and are still sort of exploring making that shift, while others are giving it 100% and putting everything on the line to sort of launch a business. And I think that's what really that's why it was really hard for me to sort of to fully come forward as an either artist or curator, because I think it takes a lot of dedication. And even working on the show that we're doing right now in New York, I have a full-time job. So for me, it was either late evenings or weekends that I had to go back and forth with the artists, with the gallery. We have every single artwork on a unique screen. There's unique installations. Some of them are interactive. Some of them will have people sitting down and typing prompts appearing on the wall. And the amount, I'm so grateful for the Bitforms team handling most of the technical things, but still, regardless, it's a lot of work. And in this space, it's also really hard to monetize this kind of work. I personally am not taking a percentage of the drop. I'm just taking a very small one-off fee, but I honestly don't know how curators manage to support themselves. And the result is that curators are becoming art dealers. And I think that's something I wanted to not do, because then inherently you have a bias towards certain artists. And that's why I continue to sort of have my full-time job, and then everything I do curatorially wise continues to stay very objective in my selection process. But I completely understand, for people who want to do this as a full-time thing, it requires finding other different ways to monetize. And it's unfortunately a challenge, and it's a challenge that has been coming through since the art world. And we sort of, I think it's been a couple of years that, we started this, we used to have this talk series, curating, oh my God, I even forgot what it was called. It was curating NFTs or something like that, where me, Nicole, who was it, Fanny, and a couple more people would come as guests. And every week we would talk about what happened in the world of curation and what's next. And I'll be honest with you, for someone that sort of tries to give its all and be very noble about it, I'm hearing people that are sort of and they're very honest. They're I'm not a curator. I'm just someone that got lucky being early in ETH and buying the right drops and making money of it. They're being invited by different museums to curate collections. And this raises a whole new level of questions. It's about, what exactly do these art institutions want? And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, they want the clout. And so so we're seeing sort of two different levels or roles of a curator, where some of them are more about, I'm in it for the art, I'm not in it for the money, I'm in it for the noble cause. And then there are others which are brutally honest. And I don't think neither of them are wrong, because at the end of the day, museums wouldn't be interested in this if there wasn't money, So we all all these different players, they fulfill each other. And same thing for flippers. Like if our prices were high for the artists, I don't think I would be able to collect. Like the only reason I was able to collect early on because there was opportunity to collect several items, you sell something, and you continue buying more emerging artists. So it kind of like you keep going, and if one of the artists you purchase succeeds, you can sell the work to buy more emerging artists. And that's pretty much all I did with my Tezos collection over like the last 2 years. I would just like continue growing and growing, but now that the market has reached a really high saturation, like we're seeing, if before, you would see one or two like big collections drop, now it's becoming more frequently. And I think that is my little point of concern, because how do we, in an oversaturated market, how do we continue to grow, and how do we continue to make sure that the prices are doing well? Because what's different now is that before, in the traditional market that we love making fun of, that takes 50% of our earnings, they care about the artist's secondary market. And so even after selling the artwork, they continuously provide opportunities for artists to maintain that market. Unfortunately, what we're seeing now is we're seeing all these drops and releases, and they just keep going and focusing on the sort of the primary market. But who's going to take responsibility for the secondary market? And I think this is a really big concern for me, and and sort of something I've been talking to people about. How do we establish for like an ecosystem basically of an artist's growth that's continuous? And even for Code Chronicles, all the works that we're putting out there, they're all one-on-ones. And I just felt like it was a good time to pause and reflect. And I'm not saying it's wrong or right or anything. I'm just saying that, you do you and do as many works as you want. I don't think, we need to filter that. But I do think we need to look towards more ways on how to manage all this in the long run. Yeah, and I'd love to hear sort of, I don't know, if anyone has any thoughts or ideas. I've been sort of rambling on. Please share while I will have a little sip of water.
Hi, Alex. It's Danielle. I have a quick question comment. I loved what you were talking about like, who's going to pay attention to artists' secondary markets here, right? In the traditional art world, you have gallerists doing sales of your old work and, getting them into museums or to auction houses. And in this space, it's sort of like on the artist to maybe promote their second, their older works and try to like have their secondary market, move. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear like, from your perspective as a curator, is that something that you look at or think about in terms of, if you're organizing a show or, doing a curation for a space, are you generally more interested in new works, or do you also like to think about and sort of like mine an artist's past works and try to get some, secondary support for their older work?
So I think it's a bit of both. As a writer, for example, that's my outlet to curate things, and I highlight whether it's secondary, whether it's primary. I sometimes, like every month or two, I do these overviews of like the arts I like, or when we interview collectors for them to highlight the work. So in those cases, I don't really care if it's primary or secondary. But again, like I'm because I'm not when I write these articles, they are for myself. I don't take profit. And I think that's the biggest difference. If you're selling on the primary market, it's really lucrative. So it's a question of how does the gallery benefit from selling on the secondary market? How do we? And in the traditional world, it's actually a really lucrative market. Especially for like the more established artists. And here, in this space, honestly, I think it's very difficult for me to say. the model is different, and
Yeah, it doesn't incentivize outside curators, right? Because if there are royalties, they're generally going to the artist, and to the seller. And so if you're sort of like, promoting an artist's older works, their secondary works, you're not getting anything out of it, which, doesn't provide a whole lot of incentive. It's an interesting question, yeah, this was so great. I thank you for highlighting sort of like the history and all these different things. Like, I think it's important to know sort of some of these, earlier Web3 initiatives, and then also have the connection to, the things in the traditional art world, because as you said, everything is kind of starting to merge and blend. And we'll see.
yeah, for sure. It's definitely merging and blending. Some things are being reproduced in a better way. Some things are being built from scratch. And I'm hearing, again, like when I say I'm hearing, it means me just being on Twitter 24/7 and seeing patterns in like what people are posting about that I pay attention to. And some people are saying, oh, we should go back to the traditional art world because, they already established everything. But the problem is a lot of artists that establish themselves within this space would have never been accepted by the traditional art world. So by going back to these old structures and models, we're just going to like make an environment in which, again, there's not going to be space to thrive. So I don't think we should go back. We can learn, we can certainly learn, but what has changed is that technology has offered us another chance to identify new ways. And I think the only like healthy way for secondary is dealing, like is people buying and selling. And I don't think that flipping is a bad thing. Like if it's immediate, maybe it's just ridiculous. But if it's like a month or two, it's healthy. Like people are buying your work, which is great. B, they're like profiting from it, so they can make money to buy more work. And so I think that maybe we need to have more sort of collectors among these galleries, because then it's in their interest to have a healthy secondary market. Otherwise, it's just a production machine, and who's gonna, So it's basically now the responsibility of the collectors to support a healthy secondary market for artists, because artists, I feel like it's a lot for them to handle by themselves.
Alex, it's Connie. I'm going to hop in here because I've really, really loved this portion of the conversation. I agree with Danielle that yes, we feel like traditionally, like, or at least in Web3, we artists have to promote. But I'm curious from your standpoint, like in the traditional market, how much does record of exhibition histories, auction, and like even media coverage play into the secondary market?
It's incredibly large. It's like if you think about the career of the artist, it's built upon economic value and cultural value. And as sort of his career grows, both of these factors play, and it determines the price of all the artist's works, whether there was a certain amount of exhibitions, whether there was representation by a gallery, whether it's in the collection of a famous collector or a museum, of course, how many articles were written, what were like the record sales. All of these things go into that. And also, another thing that definitely galleries have been controlling is the supply and the price. So no one in their healthy minds would auction a work from primary market. That is like the number one rule not of things not to do. And that's what I find fascinating, that this whole market and super rare and like Sotheby's, Christie's bringing primary artist sales, it's all auctions.
But this is what's, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead. It's fascinating to me.
No, I agree, because now when you put it that way, like what's really interesting about Web3 and the blockchain is that really it's always been about the oeuvre of the artist, but really just from a sales and transaction history. So I actually feel like the blockchain is kind of, at least from what I've seen, missing the record of these exhibitions and the auctions and media histories. And I think the only I guess, channel that I've heard of maybe collecting this history on the ledger is the platform. But do you know of any others that are trying to bring this kind of non-sales record into the blockchain?
Interesting. I haven't heard much about the platform, but I work at Joyn, as you know. What we do is we bring different opportunities, including like vertical open calls to artists to apply and to participate. And something that we are doing is every time you win an awards or you participate in something and you're one of the winners, maybe not of the main prize, but for one of the prizes, it gets added. Like once basically the project selects the winners, it gets added. So on these artist profiles, have that history. And so I don't know, I can share maybe an example of NFT Show Europe because they've been doing a ton. So they're building galleries for winners, and then each time basically the artwork is referenced, it shows like which awards the artist won. So something we're definitely working on is looking at how can we bring this on chain or into the metadata, so that when you check out an artist, you can see all the different things. So I'm showing like a profile of an artist right now, and you can see all the different competitions he participated in. You can see the awards. You can see what they joined. It's it's not perfect, but it's definitely the direction we want to be taking, because I think there's definitely room for that. And financial history of sales is definitely not the only record of information we should be documenting.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in on that if that's all right. Fantastic question. And my mic sometimes gets really wonky. So if I sound all like discombobulated, please just let me know. My question is kind of in relationship to the role of collectors and how you see that playing out in the role of curation. When you are actually curating an exhibition, how important is it for you to kind of make sure that you're reaching out during that process to collectors, and what advice do you have for artists to kind of identify more prominent collectors in the space?
That's a very good question, because maybe anything I could say could help or be practical. Again, the role of the curator before used to be very focused on narrating the story, documenting and archiving the work. Now it's literally anything. A couple years back, I was told off for mentioning the word marketing, but I think marketing plays a big role, and that's exactly what you're asking, like who markets this, right, before the drop. And
yeah,
I don't think there's any right or wrong. Because if you're going to sit and wait that the gallery does the work for you, you might miss out on an opportunity. So while obviously the gallery or the platform promoting you should do the most they can because it's in their financial interest, it's also in your interest to do as much outreach as possible. I myself am terrible at that, like reaching out to collectors and telling things. But I'm really, for example, good at making, momentum and noise, because it's the way I feel. So I think that if you don't feel comfortable at selling, just express how you feel. Like if you're extremely excited about the show that you're doing, just tell people and offer them something. We used to do is like offering walkthroughs or recording like videos of you and your piece and talking about it and sharing it. I think that's definitely worth it, like especially if you don't have the benefits of the physical space where you can invite people and do that. Like you can just do it online. And I always think of Justin Aversano, who was DMing absolutely every collector and no one wanted to buy for 1 ETH. And then finally someone bought and here we are, So definitely, like, unfortunately, grinding is a very big part of selling.
Yeah, totally. And just on that note, it's like, it's very tricky I've at least found, like, to assess kind of, which types of collectors are actually buying now, because I found that most of them, when I go through the wallets, it's like, okay, they've kind of more or less stopped buying. and it's more or less kind of going into the same pool that they've already dipped in. So as this kind of like terrain of emerging artists, it becomes a really interesting dynamic of like, where do you price your work so that people like that seem to respect it, but also are willing to take kind of like a risk on investing in it. So yeah, any and all thoughts on that? I really appreciate it.
I see. Okay, well, maybe if I needed to sell something, I'll definitely go to a conference, try to make friends with as many collectors as possible, and try to ask them for as much advice as possible, because I'm sure everyone has their own thing. And then also, like, you can look at the collectors' wallets and see what kind of art they collect, and then approach by the ones you like most, or maybe even start onboarding others that haven't tried collecting from before, like from the traditional world into the digital world. I think I definitely sense that as well. Like, while I was collecting much more a year ago, right now it's definitely harder. I don't know why. I honestly, I don't know why. It's probably because we're in the bear market, but there are still people collecting. So you just have to keep at it. Like, it's hard. It really is hard. Like, we had the Object One drop the other day, and I think if it was happening in 2021, it would have been completely different numbers than it is now. It's nothing to do with the quality of your art or anything like that. It's just the market conditions can have a really big effect.
Aleksandra, this is Christian. How are you doing? It's great to see you again.
Yeah, great to hear from you again.
I'm curious about the relationship between collectors and curators. I mean, you've just curated a show with a collector, Clown Vamp, and your note about how collectors often end up taking on a curatorial role purely as a side effect of their idiosyncratic choices. The accumulation of work grants them now some authority to decide or become tastemakers in that marketplace. I'm wondering if you could develop or add some anecdotes about that experience. I'm asking because I'm a member of the Conceptualists, and my friend Kenneth Goldsmith, over the course of 25 years, simply accumulated material for a website that constituted eventually an authoritative documentary account of the 20th century avant-garde, and it became so important a work of Americana that it's now in the Library of Congress. And it's just the side effect of his own idiosyncratic taste. It doesn't aspire to be a truly custodial kind of collection of material that's representative of anything other than his own idiosyncrasies. So I'm curious about that role that the curator has in defining taste, and to what degree it actually reflects something bigger than, say, the idiosyncrasies of a personal opinion about art.
Yeah, okay. It's a handful question, but I'll try my best to answer. So I think it's about the context, right? One thing is curating for a museum where you have the timeline and you have a whole team supporting you and the guidelines. Another thing is the context I shared is something which is more immediate, and it was more for the occasion. I think personally that a lot of people right now, especially the collectors who are collecting AI in the form of NFTs, they can be counted like by hands, like they're not that many, let's be honest. Like, how many people do really know about AI art that has been minted on the blockchain? Like, it's a handful of collectors, and most of them we know by name, and the other half, they don't want to be named. And so they are brilliant people that know about the history of AI art, but it's a completely different context. And most of these people are most likely not going to fully know the emerging artists out there. So what I like about Clown Vamp is he does this every single day. Like, he browses Twitter, he looks for emerging artists, and a lot of artists that we highlighted were actually like not that well-known artists. Like, it was a really good mix. And so I think same goes for journalism, that a lot of people writing about NFTs, they don't truly understand what's the culture behind them, and culture is what really makes like this whole space go around. So I think like for more serious exhibitions, yes, it makes sense to have someone more knowledgeable. I'm definitely still seeing a lot of mishaps in the way people refer to the history of AI art or they document. But it's how else are we going to learn without making mistakes and trying? So I think there's so much room for opportunity, and I think everyone needs to go and try and do it. Like when I was writing about trash art 2 years ago, I got first attacked because I accidentally used a line that someone else used. And like the whole trash art community started roasting me on Twitter. It was so embarrassing and I was like panicking. But, and then I went and I interviewed 30 people that were part of the foundational movement and I became friends with them. And now I'm like a trash art historian. So I think the more we let like all these different people try to be part of the story, the better they are. I don't know if this answers your question, but it's definitely some thoughts.
Well, it does in part because, of course, we have a peer in our group, Danielle, who just by virtue of her expansiveness in collecting would almost take on a role of curatorial authority. That you might look at what people are collecting and decide that constitutes a kind of custodial assessment about what's good and what's bad in the art world, or something that you might want to emulate as a set of behaviors. I just think it's very interesting that the collector takes on an increasingly important curatorial role in our own space now. And having seen it in literature occur, I'm interested in how it's occurring here too.
I think it's important to have decentralized curation where it's not just one curator, but a group of curators. Like for NFT Show Europe, we had for every open call, there was a group of curators that together were making the final decision because everyone has a different angle. Like I can know more about like the more old school AI artists. He could know more about like the emerging under the radar artists. Someone else might know about experimental. Someone might know about, artists from countries which don't have as much opportunities to share their art. So it's good to bring like different people together so we can capture as many angles as possible. Like even for the Bitform show, I wanted to do an open call, but it was such tight deadlines that physically the gallery wouldn't have time to install basically or cater to a larger number of artists. But most of the things that we do like through Joyn, they're like a lot of them are for conferences, and that's where you can really have dozens and dozens of different artists. Actually, like another advice for like all of these different open calls and things like that, what I'm seeing often is they're not always crediting the artist. So if you're ever applying for an open call, something that could potentially help is embedding in the artwork itself something of a form of like a signature or a QR codes that can be added by the organizers to make sure that your work is properly credited. I've noticed some people started doing that, and I guess it's like almost like a fail-safe mechanism. And if they don't want it, they can always reach out to you and ask for like, the original or something, or you can include a link to the original in the submission form.
Excellent advice. Thanks again for being so generous with your time, Aleksandra. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. I think I have question for one more question, and I'm gonna after that head off to see the actual show, to see the installation. If we have one more question, if not, thank you for being such a wonderful audience today. And again, these were just my thoughts, hoping to steer you in a different direction that you might have not thought about. At the end of the day, I think doing something is better than not doing anything. And there's never black and white, Some people, we think they're ridiculous, but by some miracle, they might be doing us all a favor. So it's always good to keep an open mind.
Thank you so much. This was really helpful.